The sandwich hit the concrete with a wet slap. Mayonnaise and turkey scattered across the sidewalk like evidence of a crime. "You don't get to rest here." The woman's voice cut through the afternoon air, sharp enough to shatter glass. Amelia Rodriguez stared at the ruins of her lunch, her 7 months pregnant belly tight with shock, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm sorry." "What?" Amelia's voice trembled, one hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. The bench beneath her felt suddenly foreign, unwelcoming. Though she had sat here dozens of times before, after her prenatal appointments at the clinic across the street. The woman standing over her was tall, blonde, wearing a pristine white tennis outfit that probably cost more than Amelia made in a week. Her face was flushed with rage, her manicured hands clenched into fists. "Don't act stupid with me. This is a private neighborhood. We don't allow squatters." Across the street, Sarah Chen paused in unlocking her car door. Something about the scene made her professional instincts flare. As a state prosecutor specializing in gender-based violence and civil rights violations, she had developed a sixth sense for trouble. The pregnant woman on the bench looked terrified. The blonde woman looked dangerous. Amelia tried to stand, her movements slow and careful. "I live here, on Cedar Street, just 2 blocks over. I was just resting after my doctor's appointment." She gestured toward the women's health clinic. "I'm having some complications with my pregnancy, and my doctor said I need to take breaks when I walk." "Liar!" The word came out like a curse. "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Maple Heights Homeowners Association. I know every resident in this area, and you are not one of them." Sarah's hand froze on her car keys. She knew that name. Karen Whitmore had been on the local news 3 times in the past year for various neighborhood disputes. Each incident had involved people of color. Each time, Karen had claimed she was just protecting property values. "Please, I just need to sit for a few more minutes." Amelia's voice was getting weaker. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the October chill. "My ankles are so swollen, and the baby's been pressing on my sciatic nerve. I can show you my ID if you want." Karen's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "Oh, you bet you're going to show me ID. And when it proves you're lying about living here, I'm calling the police to have you arrested for trespassing." Amelia fumbled in her purse with shaking hands, pulling out her wallet. She extracted her driver's license and handed it over, her fingers trembling. Karen snatched it, studied it for a moment. Then her face twisted with fury. "Cedar Street. That's the subsidized housing section. You people think you can just come into our nice neighborhoods and act like you belong." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "Well, let me tell you something about your place." The sound of tearing plastic made Sarah break into a run. Karen had ripped Amelia's ID in half, the pieces fluttering to the ground like broken promises. "You destroyed my license," Amelia gasped, trying to gather the pieces. "That's illegal." "What's illegal is you polluting our neighborhood with your presence." Karen's mask had completely slipped now. "People like you are why property values are dropping. Why don't you go back to whatever hole you crawled out of?" Sarah was close enough now to hear every venomous word. She pulled out her phone, already recording. 20 years of prosecuting cases had taught her that evidence was everything, and she could see this situation spiraling toward violence. Amelia struggled to her feet, one hand on her belly, the other trying to steady herself against the bench. "I'm not causing any trouble. I just needed to rest. Please. I'll leave if it makes you happy." "Oh, you'll leave all right, but not before you learn some respect." Karen stepped closer, invading Amelia's personal space. "Maybe if your kind learned to stay where you belong, we wouldn't have these problems." The racial slur that followed hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had heard every variation in her career, testified about their impact in hate crime cases, but hearing one screamed at a pregnant woman in broad daylight still made her stomach turn. Amelia's face crumpled. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "Why are you being so cruel? I haven't done anything wrong." "Existing is what you've done wrong." Karen raised her hand, and Sarah knew what was coming next. She had seen that gesture 100 times in police reports, witness statements, hospital photographs. "Hey!" Sarah shouted, running the last few yards. "Stop right there!" Karen spun around, her hand still raised. "This is none of your business. Keep walking." "Actually, it became my business the moment you assaulted a pregnant woman in public." Sarah held up her phone, the red recording light clearly visible. "And it really became my business when you destroyed her identification and used racial slurs." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Karen's face. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Sarah Chen, Senior Prosecutor, State Attorney General's Office, Civil Rights Division." Sarah's voice carried the authority of 20 years in courtrooms. "And you, Ms. Whitmore, are about to be in serious legal trouble." Karen's confidence wavered for only a moment before her entitlement reasserted itself. "I don't care who you think you are. This is my neighborhood, and I have every right to question suspicious people." Suspicious how? Because she's pregnant. Because she's Latina. Because she was sitting on a public bench in a public area. Sarah stepped between Karen and Amelia, her body language protective. "And you have no right to destroy someone's identification or use racial slurs. That bench is maintained by our HOA fees. It's for residents only." "Show me the sign that says that. Show me any legal document that restricts access to this bench." Sarah's prosecutorial training kicked in full force. "And while you're looking for that non-existent evidence, explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to terrorize a pregnant woman." Behind Sarah, Amelia was crying harder now, both hands clutching her belly. "Something's wrong," she whispered. I think I'm having contractions." Sarah spun around, her anger transforming into protective fury. Amelia was doubled over, her face pale and sweaty. "When did they start?" "When she started yelling at me. But they're getting stronger." Amelia's voice was tight with pain and fear. "I can't lose this baby. We tried for so long." Sarah was already dialing 911. "I need an ambulance at the corner of Maple and 3rd, pregnant woman, approximately 7 months, experiencing what appear to be stress-induced contractions after being assaulted." Karen's face had gone white. "Assaulted? I never touched her." "Yet?" Sarah kept the phone to her ear while helping Amelia sit back down. "But assault includes threatening gestures, verbal attacks, and creating fear of imminent harm, all of which you've done." The 911 dispatcher's voice was clear enough for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, we're dispatching an ambulance and a patrol unit. Can you stay on the line?" "I'm a state prosecutor. I'll stay with the victim until help arrives. And operator, the person who caused this situation is still here. She destroyed the victim's identification and used racial slurs. I have video evidence." Karen began backing away. "This is ridiculous. I was just protecting my neighborhood. That's what HOA presidents do." "Stop." Sarah's command voice could have frozen water. "You're not going anywhere. In fact, you just admitted to destroying her ID, which is a Class A misdemeanor. And, given that your actions appear to have induced premature labor, we're looking at felony charges." The sound of sirens grew louder. Amelia gripped Sarah's hand. "Thank you. I was so scared. I thought she was going to hurt me and my baby." "She's not going to hurt anyone." Sarah squeezed back gently. and I'm going to make sure she faces consequences for what she's already done. The ambulance arrived first, followed closely by a police cruiser. Sarah knew the officer who emerged, Detective Maria Santos from the Bias Crimes Unit. They had worked together on several cases. "Sarah, what do we have here?" Maria's eyes took in the scene quickly, professional and thorough. Hate crime, assault, destruction of property, and possibly more depending on how Mrs. Rodriguez and her baby are doing. Sarah gestured to where the paramedics were checking Amelia's vital signs. "It's all recorded." Karen found her voice again. "This is insane. I was just asking someone to move along. That's not a crime." "Ms. Whitmore, right." Detective Santos pulled out her notebook. "You're the HOA president who's been in the news?" "I resent the implication that I've done anything wrong. I protect this neighborhood from undesirable elements." Sarah held up her phone. "Detective, this recording shows Ms. Whitmore using racial slurs, destroying Mrs. Rodriguez's driver's license, and making threatening gestures toward a pregnant woman. Mrs. Rodriguez was sitting legally on a public bench after a prenatal appointment when the attack began." The lead paramedic approached. "We need to transport her. The contractions are irregular but concerning. Stress can definitely trigger preterm labor." Sarah knelt beside the stretcher as they loaded Amelia. "I'll follow you to the hospital. Don't worry about anything else right now. Just focus on you and your baby." "Will you really prosecute her?" Amelia's voice was weak but determined. "I can't let her do this to someone else. I will personally make sure she faces every possible charge. That's a promise." As the ambulance pulled away, Detective Santos turned to Karen. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification, and I'm going to need you to answer some questions." "I want a lawyer." "That's your right. But first, you're under arrest for assault, destruction of property, and hate crime charges under state civil rights statutes." Maria began reciting the Miranda rights, while Sarah transferred the video to her phone. Over the next several hours, the case began building itself. Sarah's video was crystal clear, capturing not just Karen's words and actions, but also the fear on Amelia's face, and the visible moment when the stress-induced contractions began. Other residents, drawn by the commotion, provided witness statements. Several mentioned that Karen had harassed other people of color in the neighborhood, creating a pattern of behavior. At the hospital, Amelia's contractions eventually stopped with medication and rest, but doctors kept her overnight for observation. Her husband Miguel arrived, his construction clothes still dusty from the job site, his face etched with worry and anger. "She could have killed our baby," he said, gripping Amelia's hand. "All because we're Mexican and live in subsidized housing." Sarah had seen too many families destroyed by hate to offer empty comfort. She didn't succeed. Your baby is safe. Your wife is safe. And Karen Whitmore is going to pay for what she did. "What kind of charges are we talking about?" Miguel's voice carried the weight of previous disappointments with the justice system. "Assault in the third degree, criminal mischief for destroying the ID, harassment, and bias-motivated harassment under the Civil Rights Act. If I can prove that her actions were specifically motivated by racial animus, which I can given the slurs and her pattern of behavior, we're looking at enhanced penalties." The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Amelia looked exhausted, but determined. "I want to press charges, not just for us, but for everyone she's hurt." Over the following days, the story began to unfold in layers that surprised even Sarah. Karen Whitmore's HOA presidency had been a campaign of intimidation, targeting every non-white family in the neighborhood. Property management companies had received complaints about suspicious activities, that turned out to be children playing or families having barbecues. She had filed false police reports about drug deals that were actually neighbors helping each other with groceries or childcare. The Cedar Street residents that Karen had dismissed as subsidized housing problems included a pediatric nurse, a veteran with 2 Purple Hearts, a teacher who had been nominated for state recognition, and several small business owners. Their crime was living in a section of the neighborhood that offered affordable housing options. Sarah's investigation revealed that Karen had been systematically trying to drive out residents of color to improve the neighborhood's demographics, as she had written in several HOA emails that residents provided as evidence. The legal term for this was housing discrimination, a federal crime. The preliminary hearing drew a packed courtroom. Karen's attorney, an expensive defense lawyer named Robert Caldwell, argued that his client was simply an overzealous HOA president who had made some poor word choices while trying to maintain community standards. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, straightening his silk tie, "Ms. Whitmore is a pillar of the community. She volunteers at the country club's charity events. She maintains beautiful landscaping, and she works tirelessly to preserve property values. This entire situation has been blown out of proportion by people who want to play the race card." Sarah stood to respond, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of evidence. "Your Honor, the defense wants to frame this as a simple neighborhood dispute. But the evidence tells a very different story. Ms. Whitmore didn't just use poor word choice. She systematically targeted residents of color with harassment, false police reports, and intimidation. The assault on Mrs. Rodriguez was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern of bias-motivated harassment. Judge Patricia Williams, a black woman with 30 years on the bench, listened to both arguments before speaking. "Mr. Caldwell, I've reviewed the video evidence and the witness statements. Your client's behavior was not that of someone protecting property values. It was the behavior of someone who believes certain people don't belong in her neighborhood based on race and economic status." The courtroom was silent except for the soft crying of someone in the gallery. Sarah turned to see Amelia, now 8 months pregnant, holding Miguel's hand tightly. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, "The timing and escalation of this incident is particularly disturbing. Ms. Whitmore saw a visibly pregnant woman resting after a medical appointment and chose to attack her verbally and threaten her physically. The fact that this harassment induced contractions that could have resulted in premature labor elevates the seriousness of these charges considerably." Karen, sitting at the defense table in a conservative navy suit that was meant to make her look respectable, finally seemed to understand the gravity of her situation. Her face had gone pale, and she whispered urgently to her attorney, "Motion to dismiss denied." Judge Williams declared, "This case will proceed to trial. Bail is set at $50,000 with conditions that the defendant have no contact with the victim or any residents of Cedar Street, and that she refrain from any HOA activities pending resolution of this case." As the courtroom emptied, Sarah approached Amelia and Miguel. "How are you feeling? How's the baby?" "Better. The doctors say everything looks normal now." Amelia's hand rested on her belly. "But I still have nightmares about that day. About her face when she was screaming at me." "That's normal after a traumatic experience. Have you considered counseling? The State Victim Services Program can provide resources." Miguel spoke up. "We're thinking about moving. Some of our neighbors have been supportive, but others, they blame us for bringing negative attention to the area." Sarah had seen this pattern before. Victims of bias crimes often faced secondary trauma from community members who preferred to minimize the incident rather than confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice in their neighborhood. "That's your choice, of course. But you should know that several residents have reached out to my office volunteering to testify about Karen's previous behavior. There are people in your community who want to see justice done. The trial preparation revealed the full scope of Karen's harassment campaign. Email records subpoenaed from the HOA showed that she had been orchestrating complaints against residents of color for over 2 years. She had pressured property management companies to find lease violations, encouraged neighbors to report suspicious activities to police, and even contacted employers with false allegations about criminal behavior by residents. One particularly damaging email chain showed Karen coordinating with several other HOA board members to make life so difficult for undesirable residents that they would choose to move. The language was careful to avoid overtly racial terms, but the pattern was clear when matched with the demographics of the targeted families. Sarah's case file grew thick with evidence. Photos of the destroyed driver's license, medical records showing Amelia's stress-induced contractions, witness statements from other residents who had been harassed, the video recording that captured everything in Karen's own words. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source, Officer Jake Morrison, who had been patrolling the neighborhood that day, had been wearing a body camera that captured the entire incident from a different angle. His footage showed Karen's aggressive body language, the moment she ripped up the ID, and, most importantly, the clear fear on Amelia's face as Karen raised her hand threateningly. The body cam footage is devastating for the defense. Sarah explained to Amelia during a pretrial meeting. It shows everything from an objective perspective. No one can claim the video was edited or taken out of context. The trial began on a crisp November morning. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters from both sides. Supporters of Amelia held signs reading, "Justice for Pregnant Mothers," and "End Neighborhood Harassment." Karen's supporters, a much smaller group, carried signs about property rights and neighborhood safety. Sarah's opening statement was methodical and powerful. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a simple question. Do all residents of our community deserve to feel safe? Mrs. Rodriguez was 7 months pregnant, resting on a public bench after a prenatal appointment, when the defendant chose to attack her with racial slurs, destroy her identification, and threaten her with violence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a property dispute. This was a calculated attempt to terrorize a pregnant woman because of her race and economic status. The defense opening painted Karen as a dedicated community volunteer who had simply made some poor choices under stress. My client has devoted hundreds of hours to improving her neighborhood. She made mistakes that day. Yes, she used language she regrets, but she never intended to harm anyone, and certainly never intended to threaten a pregnant woman. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Officer Morrison testified about finding Karen attempting to leave the scene and her defensive attitude when questioned. Detective Santos described the pattern of harassment complaints filed by other residents. Medical experts explained how extreme stress could trigger premature labor and endanger both mother and child. But the most compelling testimony came from Amelia herself, dressed in a simple blue dress that accommodated her now full-term pregnancy. She spoke quietly but clearly about the terror she had felt that day. "I was so tired," she said, one hand resting on her belly. "The baby had been moving a lot, and my back was aching. I just wanted to sit for a few minutes before walking home. When she started yelling at me, I couldn't understand why. I hadn't done anything wrong." Sarah guided her through the testimony carefully. "What went through your mind when she destroyed your driver's license?" "I was scared. Really scared. She was so angry, and I didn't know what she might do next. I kept thinking about my baby, about protecting my baby." Amelia's voice broke slightly. "When she raised her hand toward me, I thought she was going to hit me in the stomach." The jury's faces showed a mixture of sympathy and anger. Several jurors were women, and 2 appeared to be pregnant or recently postpartum. They understood the vulnerability of Amelia's position. The defense cross-examination attempted to suggest that Amelia had been trespassing or acting suspiciously, but Sarah had prepared her client well. Amelia remained calm and consistent, acknowledging that she lived in subsidized housing, but pointing out that she paid taxes and had every right to use public spaces. Karen's testimony was a disaster for the defense. Under cross-examination, she became defensive and hostile, revealing the same prejudices that had motivated her attack on Amelia. "You testified that you were protecting your neighborhood," Sarah said during cross-examination. "Protecting it from what? Exactly." "From people who don't respect property values, people who don't maintain standards. People like Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman who works as a home health aide, whose husband works construction, who pays her rent and taxes. People from that section of the neighborhood bring down the entire area." That section being the affordable housing section. Yes. The section where most of the Latino and Black residents live. Karen's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard her admit that her problems were specifically with the affordable housing section, where most of the minority residents lived. The video evidence played during the trial was devastating. Even Karen's own attorney winced as the jury watched her destroy Amelia's ID and use racial slurs. The body camera footage showed the incident from multiple angles, making it impossible to claim that the behavior was taken out of context. During closing arguments, Sarah stood before the jury with quiet authority. "The evidence in this case is overwhelming. The defendant's own words and actions, recorded on video, show a clear pattern of bias-motivated harassment that culminated in an assault on a pregnant woman. Mrs. Rodriguez was targeted not because she was doing anything wrong, but because of who she is and where she lives." She paused, looking at each juror. "The defendant wants you to believe this was a simple misunderstanding, but misunderstandings don't involve destroying someone's identification. Misunderstandings don't involve racial slurs. Misunderstandings don't put pregnant women and their unborn children at risk." The defense closing argument asked for leniency, emphasizing Karen's community service and suggesting that she had learned from her mistakes. But the evidence was too strong, and the behavior too egregious for the jury to overlook. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all charges: assault in the 3rd degree, criminal mischief, harassment, and bias-motivated harassment under the State Civil Rights Act. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following month. Karen was released on her existing bail, but ordered to complete community service at organizations serving the communities she had targeted. The irony was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. The sentencing hearing drew even larger crowds. Amelia had given birth to a healthy daughter, whom she brought to court wrapped in a pink blanket. Miguel sat beside her, holding the baby, while Amelia delivered her victim impact statement. "Your Honor, what happened to me that day changed my life. I used to feel safe in my neighborhood. I used to trust that people would treat me with basic human decency. The defendant took that away from me with her hatred and her violence." Amelia's voice was steady but emotional. "But I want her to know that she failed. She tried to make me feel like I didn't belong, like my family didn't deserve to live in peace. But I do belong. My daughter belongs. We all belong in this community." Other residents testified about the positive changes in the neighborhood since Karen's arrest. The harassment complaints had stopped. Families felt safer. Children were playing outside again without fear of being reported to police for suspicious activity. Judge Williams listened to all the testimony before pronouncing sentence. Ms. Whitmore, your actions on that October afternoon were not those of a concerned neighbor. They were those of someone who believes that certain people are less deserving of dignity and safety based on their race and economic status. Karen stood for sentencing, her expensive attorney beside her. She had lost weight during the trial and looked older, diminished. The court sentences you to 18 months in county jail, suspended to 6 months with credit for time served, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You will complete 200 hours of community service at organizations chosen by the court that serve communities of color. You will attend bias awareness counseling. You will pay restitution to Mrs. Rodriguez for medical expenses and lost wages. Judge Williams paused, looking directly at Karen. Additionally, you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position, and you are prohibited from filing complaints about your neighbors unless you have witnessed actual criminal activity. The courtroom erupted in applause from the gallery. Sarah felt the satisfaction that came with a job well done, but also the sobering knowledge that this was just one case among thousands. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Amelia and Miguel. Their daughter, now 2 months old, slept peacefully in her carrier despite the commotion. "What do you want people to know about this case?" a reporter asked. Amelia looked at her sleeping daughter, then at the cameras. "I want people to know that hate has consequences, but I also want them to know that there are people like Ms. Chen who will stand up for what's right. There are good people in our community who won't let hatred win." Sarah stood nearby, watching the family she had helped protect. This case would become a landmark precedent for prosecuting bias-motivated harassment. It would be cited in legal briefs and taught in law schools. But for Sarah, the real victory was simpler. A mother and child were safe, and a community had stood up to say that hatred would not be tolerated. In the months that followed, the Maple Heights neighborhood underwent a transformation. New HOA leadership was elected, including several residents from Cedar Street. Community events were planned that brought neighbors together across racial and economic lines. The bench where Amelia had been attacked became an informal gathering place where parents watched their children play and neighbors stopped to chat. Karen Whitmore completed her community service at a Latino community center, where she was required to assist with English classes and citizenship preparation. Initially resistant and sullen, she gradually began to understand the humanity of the people she had targeted. The bias counseling sessions forced her to confront the prejudices that had shaped her worldview. Sarah continued to receive updates on the family she had helped. Amelia returned to work as a home health aide, taking care of elderly residents throughout the community. Miguel's construction company was hired to build a new playground in the neighborhood park. Their daughter, Isabella, grew into a happy toddler who charmed everyone she met. The case had broader impacts as well. The state legislature passed stronger penalties for bias-motivated harassment of pregnant women. Police departments implemented new training on recognizing and responding to hate incidents. Community organizations developed programs to address neighborhood tensions before they escalated to violence. On the first anniversary of the incident, the neighborhood held a unity celebration in the park. Families from every street came together for food, music, and games. Children played together regardless of their parents' race or economic status. Amelia and Miguel attended with Isabella, now walking and babbling in both English and Spanish. Sarah was invited as a guest of honor, though she preferred to stay in the background and watch the community she had helped heal. Detective Santos joined her, both women observing the peaceful scene with professional satisfaction. "You know what I like about this," Maria said, gesturing to the mixed crowd of families. "What's that?" "It's not just about Karen getting punished. It's about everyone else choosing to do better." Sarah nodded, watching Isabella toddle across the grass toward a group of children playing with sidewalk chalk. That's the real victory. Not just stopping the hatred, but building something better in its place. As the sun set over Maple Heights that evening, the community that had once been divided by fear and prejudice was united in celebration. Children of all backgrounds played together while their parents shared food and stories. The bench where hatred had once reared its ugly head was now surrounded by laughter and friendship. Amelia sat with Isabella on her lap, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. Miguel was helping other fathers set up a soccer goal for the older children. Sarah watched from across the park, knowing that this transformation was what justice really looked like, not just punishment for wrongdoing, but the creation of a community where everyone could feel safe and welcome. The story of that October afternoon had rippled outward, inspiring other communities to confront their own biases and work toward inclusion. Sarah's prosecution had become a model for how the justice system could effectively address hate crimes while supporting victims and healing communities. But for Amelia, Miguel, and Isabella Rodriguez, the most important outcome was simpler: they were home, they were safe, and they belonged. On that first anniversary evening, as Isabella fell asleep in her mother's arms while families cleaned up around them, that was victory enough. The bench on Maple Street still stands today, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but a reminder that ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things when faced with injustice. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say, "Stop," and mean it. Sometimes all it takes is a community willing to choose love over hatred, inclusion over exclusion, justice over indifference. In the end, Karen Whitmore's attempt to divide a community had the opposite effect. Her hatred had been met with courage, her exclusion with inclusion, her violence with justice. The neighborhood she had tried to protect had become something better than she ever could have imagined, a place where children like Isabella Rodriguez could grow up safe, welcomed, and loved. And on quiet October afternoons, when pregnant mothers rest on that bench after medical appointments, they do so in peace, knowing that their community will protect them if protection is needed. That, perhaps, is the most powerful testament to the courage of one woman who refused to stay silent when she witnessed injustice, and the community that chose to stand with her